Welcome to Wellness and Wisdom with me, Dr. Nadu Tuwakli. Here you can expect to hear conversations about everything women over 40 care about. From optimal wellness and peak performance, from intimacy to travel and finances and more. I will be speaking to interesting women and sometimes men to educate and motivate you to live your best life. If you want to find out more, please head over to my website, drtwakli.com, or subscribe to my blog. You can also read my book, Sex, Sanity, and Sleep. We are in this together. Welcome back to Wellness and Wisdom, a podcast with me, Dr. Nadu Tuwakli. As you know, the aim of my podcast is to enable women to reach their full potential. I want you to listen to my podcast and leave with a head full of ideas. And it's not just for women. Men need to be our allies and try to understand what makes us tick. So steer them this way as well. My goal is to provide accurate, transparent information that will help you live life in a better way and be optimistic and realistic about the future. I hope it will be a dialogue and not just a one-way narrative. Today, we're going to talk about a new world order and women's advancement and something about climate change. I have a conversation with an amazing lady who is charged with making the planet free of poverty, carbon, and exclusion by the year 2030. 3-0. Talk about pressure. A couple of months ago, my next guest, a fellow Harvard alum, was the keynote speaker at the Harvard Global Women's Empowerment Expo. And for good reason. She is someone who is making an impact both locally and globally. This lady proves that you can be a changemaker at any age. I can't wait to hear her take on what role women can play in the climate crisis. Perhaps a new world order where global leadership is redefined to be more inclusive and one that considers women's abilities and strengths. I know that she believes women should be the change they want to see. And boy, does she want to see a lot of change. We'll get into just how much a little bit later. So my guest today is Gaia Van Der Esch. She is an executive, policy expert, and author who is driving change and impact in the public and non-profit sectors through strategic and thoughtful leadership. She is the managing director to the 3-0 Foundation, which has a staff of over 8,000 in 45 countries. Prior to this, she served as the leader of the G20 Private-Public Alliance for the advancement of women's leadership. Thanks to her accomplishments, she was nominated by Forbes magazine in its 30 Under 30 list for 2017. She is a sought-after speaker at numerous international events. She speaks 5 European languages, so we're very lucky to have her with us today. Gaia has 2 master's degrees, one in international relations and one in public admin. So let's get into it. Hi, Gaia. Welcome.
Hi, Nadu. Thank you so much for having me.
So what can you tell us about yourself personally that we haven't already said?
I mean, you've said a lot, maybe some more personal information. I grew up in a tiny village in Italy, which I think is something that has affected my life. I grew up surrounded by nature, by a lake, by a national park, and in a very tight-knit community. Where now I'm getting married in a month. I'm getting married in this tiny village.
Yay! Congratulations!
Thank you. And the whole village is mobilized for my wedding because of course it's the event of not the year but at least of July. And I think having these very close relationships and having this very close contact to nature, it's something that has really shaped me and I really carry with me. So I would say this is a more personal thing that maybe you can't know because it's not in my official bio.
So I understand that you are quite the celebrity, not just in your village, but in Italy too. How did that come about?
I don't see myself as a celebrity, but thank you so much for saying that. It's something that has come in a very organic way. It's something that I have not planned or that I never imagined to become in a certain sense within my country or beyond. And it's something that has been, I would say, driven through action. I'm someone that is very pragmatic. I I really like doing things, fixing problems. I'm also someone that is very opinionated. So I have my opinions and I want to share them and I want to create debate and I want to discuss like people, like what we're doing today together. And I think this mix of being someone very out there in terms of action and trying to change things, and also in terms of speaking up for the things I believe in, kind of automatically made me someone that has a platform and that can speak to different topics, and people are drawn to and interested in listening what I have to say and what I think. So it's something really that it has happened, and probably hopefully with time I will have an even bigger platform to bring even more change than what I have today. But it's definitely something that I would say has not been strategically planned. It's more something that has organically developed, and I'm just, riding the wave.
And it was interesting to hear you talk about growing up in a small village in Italy, because my sister-in-law actually is from Camoli. Have you ever heard of Camoli?
Camogli?
Yeah, Camoli.
Maybe, yeah.
Most people haven't heard of it, but it's near Genoa. And it's so small that they don't even have a high school. So when she was high school age, she had to go to Genoa for high school. And growing up in that village, she told me that she was so determined to get out of there and see the world that she chose linguistics, which is her field. And now she speaks about 8 languages. And she went straight to London, to try to just see the world. And she's just an amazing person in the sense that she spent a year, I think, in China, picked up Chinese. She, wherever she goes, she picks up the language. So I kind of get the sense that you also had that, let's say, wanderlust to want to get out and see the world. And now you're just like a change maker.
I definitely have that wanderlust.
So tell me a little bit about your international travel.
Yes.
Or where you haven't been.
Yeah, so my international travel, I would say, is a bit in my blood. So my dad is from the Netherlands, so he's not Italian. I'm half Italian, half Dutch. And he himself is half Dutch, half Canadian, with a grandmother that I don't know why used to spend half of the year in Canada, half of the year in New Zealand, traveling by boat for 1 month to always be in summer because she had some allergy issues and she had family in New Zealand. And of course, my other half is Italian. So I somehow have it in my veins, right? This traveling for me has just been a natural part of my life because it was the only way to see my family. We have no one in the village, no one from my immediate family, either in Italy or of course abroad, that lives in the village or in the area. So we always needed to get in a car or to take a train or to take a plane just to be with our family. So for me, it's something that has always been very natural. I actually have a memory, which I think is one of my first memories. When I was 3.5, my parents put me on a plane by myself to go to see my grandma in Milan. And I felt so grown up and so in charge and so happy that I was, flying by myself. And it just gave me a big sense of independence, but also a big curiosity to discover what was out there. And as your cousin that you've mentioned, also my village doesn't have a high school. I also had to go to the big city nearby, which is Rome. I had to commute 1 hour there, 1 hour back every day for 5 years to go to high school. And that really slowly opened more worlds, right? And the curiosity of seeing, okay, people in the city live a completely different life, and how is that? And how I was perceived. I was perceived that they always used to say that my hair smelled of fireplace, because we use a lot of fireplaces to warm up in winter, and they were not used to it, right? They were always like, oh, you smell of fireplace, this is weird. And so I slowly started discovering the world, but also how I was perceived from the rest of the world as someone with my roots. And I've been traveling ever since. I lived in Africa a few times. I've lived in the Middle East for several years. I was working on Syria and on Iraq during the beginning of the war in Syria, 2011 to 2015. I've been for work in all continents. I've been to Asia, I've been to Haiti after the hurricane, I've been to Ecuador, I've been to Colombia, I've been to many African countries and to Malaysia. Like, I really discovered, let's say, the world through traveling. And I also did something very similar to your cousin. Wherever I could, I tried to pick up the local language, because to me it's really a different way of connecting, even if you know just a little bit, but that it at least shows your interest towards the local culture and your, willingness to connect and understand what's happening around you. It makes a huge difference in relationships. So I also at some point picked up Swahili when I was living in Kenya and in Tanzania. I tried to pick up Arabic when I was in Middle East. I've forgotten everything since, but it made a difference while I was there. And I still continue to travel a lot for work. I must say that I know I'm not old, I'm 35, but I already feel the difference. When I was 25, I would have, taken without any issue a plane, gone to the other side of the world within 2 days and come back. Now, whenever I need to do these quick trips, I also feel the tiredness behind it, and I feel that it's not as easy to do it. And I'm also long more for stability. I long more for home, which is something that I never had before. So, it changes with time. But of course, traveling for me is I don't know, the world is so rich. We have one life, and it's an eye-opening experience to learn from others and other cultures and other ways of doing. And it also makes you realize that you're just one small piece within this world, and your way is not
one speck on the ocean.
Yeah, and what you think is right is not necessarily right for others, and that's part of, having a self-awareness of our role in the world.
I got to say, you've done a lot for a 35-year-old. It makes me tired just listening to you.
No.
So let's talk a little bit about women. Obviously, women are the hub of society, and they have so many hats: mother, spouse, sister, teacher, mediator, caregiver, homemaker, career woman. And then, at least here in the States, with the onset of COVID, then they became the homeschooler and had to learn the technology involved in homeschooling. I feel that the new world order has to include women's advancement in whatever it is we're talking about, whether it's climate change or elimination of poverty. But before we talk about your book, I wondered if you had any ideas about the role of women. You were talking about having been in Syria and Iraq, and there's always the war mediators and the people that supposedly are brokering peace. How often is there a woman at the table in those negotiations? And do you think that having a woman there would make any kind of significant difference?
So in short, the answer is definitely not enough. If we would have more women in decision-making positions, on negotiation tables, in leading governments, leading companies, I'm super sure that our world would look very, very different from what it looks today. There are a few reasons I say this. One thing that you said, which I completely agree, we are so multitasking, right? Like we are, as you said, mom and spouses and daughters, and we often are family carers in general, even of the family of our partners. We're the ones that remember to, be in touch and check in and take care. We have our careers. We have, of course, a friendship circle. We have so many different aspects of our life and so many different roles that we hold at the same time, which is already something very special and very unique, which really make us, as you said, the heart of a community, or the people that usually know what's happening and know what's wrong, and that are going to be on the front line in responding and in changing things for the sake of their family, for the sake of their friends, for the sake of their community. Women, and studies show that women on average have a more long-term vision and a more long-term perspective when they take decisions, probably because of our biological nature, that we think about, future generations. Kind of, it's an innate instinct we somehow have. And also women on average show more empathy, more capacity to connect to other people. Of course, we're all on a gray scale, and I'm not saying men can't be empathetic and women are, and there are some women that are not, and vice versa. But on average, these are traits that we bring to the table. being multitasking, being empathetic, being collaborative, and thinking long term. If only today in our companies and in our countries we would think long term, we would be empathetic, we would be kind towards other people and think about the common good, be it of our family, of our community, of our country, of our company, and not only about profit and about, getting ahead, being competitive, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? We wouldn't have the wars that we have today. We wouldn't have all these consequences also on nature and on taking care of, the living that surrounds human beings. We wouldn't have all these inequalities that we have. So the answer in short is women are not in decision-making positions. That's a huge problem, of course, that we're all trying to fix, that it's very difficult to change culture also because it requires change from those that are in power, and those that are in power instinctively try to keep their power and they feel threatened by, others trying to get hold of that power and share it. And women are not around the negotiation tables, and they're not in Syria, they're not in Ukraine, they're not in most of the conflicts that we see ongoing. And if only we would have women around these tables, I'm sure that there would be more women at least. I'm sure that there would be a huge impact in terms of the capacity to come to a compromise to save lives, because the perspective that we bring is simply very different from the mainstream, let's say, man's perspective to the table.
I agree with you 100%. It's hard to say that women have never started a war, but at the same time, that could just be because women are never the leaders, so you can't make a false deduction from that. But clearly, if women were included, there would be, as you say, a completely different perspective. And on both sides, people might be a little bit more receptive to the idea that what are we fighting about? But speaking about women in leadership, let's talk about your book. So tell me about your book.
The book I'm writing, I actually have my deadline to submit the full manuscript in 3 weeks, so I'm full on into writing.
At the same time as the wedding.
I know, it's actually the day before the wedding, which is a very bad coincidence. It wasn't planned, but that's life. I'm trying to make the most out of it. So the book is going to be entitled Leading Our Way: How Women Are Redefining Leadership, and it's going to be published by the end of this year globally. So it's going to be a global release by Wiley in a big American publishing house. So I already published a book in Italy about society and polarization and why we don't manage to change as a country, why we're so divided. And the idea of the second book, which I wanted to be in English and not in Italian because it really doesn't speak about Italy, it speaks about the world and about women within the world, came really from my personal experience. So as you mentioned at the very beginning, I was the G20 EMPOWER Sherpa. So I was, let's say, leading this public-private alliance for women's empowerment under the G20, the Italian presidency of the G20 in 2021. And it was the first time that I really was full on briefed and into the gender equality space, right? Before I was a manager, of course, I saw issues related to myself, related to other women, but that was my first time that I had full mental space and capacity to think only about that, to read about that, to be informed, and then of course to influence the policies and the decisions that the G20 countries were taking with concerns to women's empowerment. And one reflection that always came back in my head is that there's so much focus on how can we get the seat at the table, right? How can we get women into the decision-making rooms? But often there's not much focus on what do we do once we have that seat at the table. And of course, it's super important. The first step is getting the seat at the table, because, if we don't have it, there's not much we can influence. But to me, it's also important, and it goes back to the question you asked before, to start thinking, okay, but what do we bring once we are at that table? Is there some different traits that we can bring in terms of leaderships, in terms of vision for our world, in terms of fixing global challenges? And how is it that we can make sure that we're not just replicating existing models, which are very masculine type of models, simply because, not because men are mean or anything, but because they've been built for and by men over generation.
Tradition.
Exactly. It's just carrying forward the tradition. How is it that instead of doing that, which I think many of us do, including myself, right? We kind of play by the rules of the game, but those rules have been created in a culture, in a perspective that is often different from the culture and the perspective that women have. But we need to adapt. So we play by the rules of the game. We're very competitive. We're very focused on profit, or we're very focused on holding power. But how is it that we can actually get that seat at the table and then change what leadership means, change what management means? And one thing for me as a young, let's say youngish woman, is also trying to understand from who can I learn how we could be different, right?
Mentors.
All the leadership, so having mentors and having role models and reading of stories of impressive women that had that capacity to do things differently and to get that seat at the table, but then redefine what that seat looks like once they were at the table. I wanted to write this book because it's something that I was lacking and I want to see more of. And I thought maybe if I managed to tell the story of this type of women, other women and even other men will be inspired by them, and we will have an expanded understanding of what leadership looks like and what leadership acts like. And I'd say women and men, because for me, men are as caught into stereotypes as we are. Men shouldn't show their feelings, shouldn't be too empathetic, shouldn't be too collaborative. There's a lot of pressure among men as well to fit the manly stereotype. A mold, exactly. And we need to take this mold away for women and for men. It's not only a matter of us women. It's really rethinking what leadership means, and that means taking or reshaping this mold for all of us. And so this book is a book where it has been an amazing journey. I got to speak to amazing women, like if I think of the US profiles, probably you know Gloria Steinem, of course, Diane von Furstenberg. I interviewed last week Becky Sauerbrand, who's the captain of the US national soccer team, who's going to play at the World Cup later this summer. I have Cristiana Figueres, who's the woman behind the Paris Climate Agreement. So I have very different profiles from many different parts of the world. And it's really a book that tells in each chapter their story of leadership, their failures. I think we don't speak enough about our failures and how we get to where we get also through failures. So we're having very honest conversations about what went wrong in their life, what is still going wrong, and what is it that they want to change. Because even if people appear on the top of the world, often on the inside they're not necessarily on top of the world. And then it's a discussion about their story, really to inspire others and to learn through their own story, but also about how, according to them, we need to rethink leadership. So not only about their story of getting at that leadership at the position or that table, decision-making table, but also about how then we should reshape it and how can we reshape it for future generations. Each of them has a key word, which is going to be the name of the chapter, and it's a trait that they want to see more of. So we have compassion, we have curiosity, we have consistency, we have integrity, we have freedom, we have many different words that they say, okay, this is the one thing I would want to see more. And all together, hopefully they will give us new traits and a new model for leadership that we can all learn from and pick what works for us, because finally each of us needs to find their own way. There's no, perfect way that fits everyone, but at least it gives the option to think about it, to learn from these amazing women, and to then find your own way of leading.
Right. Even if these women are not mentoring us, but they're still acting as role models in the sense that you are allowing us to listen to their thoughts and their ideas and how they've overcome things that maybe we might be facing too. Or like you said, sometimes you look at these famous women and it seems like their whole world is fabulous. What do they have to worry about? And they look calm and happy about it, but you really don't know how much of a trial they're going through. From a medical standpoint, I can tell you how often I hear that a celebrity died from something basically so basic in medicine that we could easily have cured it. And I'm thinking, what? These people have all the money in the world. What are their doctors thinking? Like Tina Turner just died because of her high blood pressure. And I'm thinking that's crazy. But if you look at her, she looked like the picture of health, and she did a great job. She was keeping her weight down. She was energized, and you just never know what's going on with people. So it's always nice to have an inside look at these. So I read that Gaia is the Greek goddess of the earth.
She is.
Yes. And apparently she was considered the mother goddess. She was the personification of the earth spirit. From her, the world was born. And her creation brought calm to an otherwise chaotic universe. That's a pretty hard act to follow. So, let's talk about your current position as a global changemaker and managing director of 3.0. How's that for a segue? Can you once again save the earth?
Oh, I wish I could. I wish I had a magical stick and I could just, change things like this original goddess probably did. It's very complicated and it's hard work.
Yeah. Well, the goddess thing probably is outdated and overrated, as they would say in today's world. But I guess back then it was like, ba-da!
It's done.
So tell us about 3.0. What is 3.0?
3.0, as I just will do a reminder because you said it at the very beginning, is zero exclusion, zero carbon, zero poverty. The idea behind this is to try and see and get people to see that these different components are interlinked. You're not going to have a world where we fix climate change if we're not also working on poverty alleviation and on making sure people's voices are included in decision making. And often at global level, we have these global agendas that might be the COP, so the meeting that happens every year around climate change, or it might be, the poverty agenda or the democracy governance agenda that are treated as if they're completely standalone things. But when you go, in Somalia or in Syria, we were discussing before about Syria, when you go in a village like mine in Italy, people don't see this as different agendas with different follow-up points, right? People see climate change happening, they're losing their livelihood, they become poorer, they would want things to change, but they don't have a voice in decision making. And by not being part of decision making, probably they're even more impacted because they can't, change their own environment, change their own community. These things are linked. As long as we don't see it, we're not going to have efficient responses on the ground to really help and lift people out of this situation, especially the most vulnerable people. We have across the globe a huge amount of people. It's 2 billion that live in an area which is very vulnerable to climate change. They live in poverty and they don't have a voice in decision making within their countries, be it voting, be it being part of civic processes. So it's 2 billion people, that's 1 every 4 human beings that lives in an area where there are these 3 problems. They have these 3 problems. They're poor, they're highly impacted by climate change, and they don't really have a voice. It's 1 out of 4 people. For me, that's it's shocking. It's so big, the problem. And we continue going with these global agendas saying, okay, now climate change, let's do this. Okay, now poverty, as if it's all separate. But as I was saying, if we don't understand that it is not separate, that one thing makes the other worse, and that we need to have responses that are linked to the territories, to the communities, that understand what's happening on the ground, not that are super detached, decided in New York or in Geneva, and then applied to the rest of the world, we're not going to fix things. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to assemble all sorts of actors, be it from the governments, of course the non-profit sector, we are a non-profit, be it philanthropists, be it the private sector, innovators, entrepreneurs, to work together, which is something we don't do enough, to fix these problems, but fix them not in terms of big words and big agendas, but fix them on the ground to really lift out of poverty, lift out of exclusion, and lift out of climate change consequences the 2 billion poorest people in the world which are de facto being left behind. So this is what we're trying to do. It's a huge ambition, it's a tough work, but we need ambitious people, and we need to be able to dream and try to make it happen if we want to.
Someone's got to do it, right?
Someone's got to do it.
But these are really lofty goals. So in your view, are they actually attainable, especially at a time when international cooperation seems to be falling apart?
Falling apart is a very generous way of putting it. I mean, the hard answer, it's going to be very hard. Behind all the global agenda timelines, be it 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals, being 2050 for, let's say, climate neutrality, for example, at the European level, countries are not moving fast enough. Countries are still very focused on short-term responses to what's happening, not long-term thinking of how we can prevent things from getting worse. And the lack of cooperation and this rise of, nationalist interests, of course, are things that are making the whole situation even worse. To me, though, what is important is that we can't just say, okay, it's very hard and it's probably not happening within the timeline we need. But we have to keep the hope there, right? If we just say, okay, international cooperation is not really going in the right direction, governments are not working together, people in power are just holding on to power despite it probably hurts most of the population,
the whole world.
Yeah, and that's all very true, but that makes it even more necessary to have people that try to bring something different to the table, that are ready to put themselves out there, and that are ready to keep up that hope, but not just by being hopeful, but by acting, by doing things every single day that can actually make a difference. If we lose that hope, if we lose that light, then we lose our capacity to act and to try and change things. And I think what you're doing also with this podcast is a way, right, of acting, of getting people engaged, of getting people to think. And all these things are really, really important that we all continue doing them, because finally, and to me, change often comes from the bottom. And if you look at the Me Too movement, if you look at Black Lives Matter, it's not CEOs or heads of governments that were like, oh, we need to be more inclusive and we need to reduce inequality and we need to be less racist. It was us, the people, that put so much pressure that now every CEO is super freaked on how they can be more inclusive, because otherwise people are not going to buy their product, right? So I think we need to remember that individual and collective power that we have, that is not linked to positions, is linked to our voting capacity, to our consumer capacity, to our capacity to go down and take on the streets. And we, each of us together, can act and can change things and can put pressure for those in decision-making positions to change. It's never going to be fast enough, unfortunately, but we need to keep that pressure for change to happen, because we have no option B, no planet B. We need to fix this.
You got to be good to your skin. You got to be good to your planet. You don't have anywhere else to live. So Gaia, I'm on board. Let's keep hope alive. This is such a broad topic, however. What are your priorities?
Yes, that's also a broad question in the sense that I have so many priorities. And what's interesting is that I'm in this mixed phase where we've started this work. I started this role just 6-7 months ago. So it's a new role for me, and I'm still, personally learning the team dynamics, navigating my role and what I can do, what maybe, the presidents of the foundation want to have a say on. I'm still internally in a very navigating, exploring type of phase. But that for me is definitely a priority because understanding your role, understanding your scope of action, understanding your team, understanding how to create a positive dynamic inside is the first step to then be effective on the outside. So that's definitely something that takes a lot of my time and a lot of my energy right now. And sometimes it literally takes energy away from me. It's draining, it's this all human resources type of work, and relationships and power relations is something that is tiring, but that it's part of bringing change also on the inside. And it's always the first step, and that's what I'm currently working on. In terms of external priorities, one of the first things that we want to do is to try and build a shift in mindset with other partners. The problem is that even in the public sector and the non-profit sector, where we're all working theoretically for the common good, the reality is that there's a fierce competition, and that each NGO or each organization is trying to position, to fundraise, to do their own thing, to put their logo, to have visibility. A competition is fierce and is there. And that's one of the first things that blocks us from being more effective in terms of impact by working together, very simply, because each of them has their own territoriality issues and their own, positioning and ego issues. And so one of the first things we try to do is to build an understanding with core partners that none of us by ourselves is going to lift out of poverty and help deal with climate change the 2 billion poorest people. Like, no organization is big enough to do that. So either we join forces and we agree to put our somehow brand and ego on a second layer and focus on the work that needs to be done, or we're not going to get the job done. And so one thing that we are doing is starting these circles of partnerships around us that are like-minded, that are ready to take that step and to say, okay, we also want this 3.0 world. How is it that we can really join forces to make it happen? And that's really a mindset shift, and it's not easy. And also there, like, you have, some people that are excited, and someone else from the team comes in and says, no, but we need, our logo, or no, this is in competing with our priorities. So it's a trial and error process, but that's also a big priority to really make a difference on the ground then together.
I'm impressed that at 35, you've got this all figured out. I went to Haiti after the first big earthquake to volunteer. And there was a lot of shuttling here and there and secrecy, and you're not allowed to say what address you're. And so then they decided they were going to have this big meeting because all the NGOs were working, by themselves. There was no coordination. There was nothing. My sense at the time was because the world community had offered billions of dollars to help Haiti with the earthquake, these NGOs just came out of the woodwork. I mean, they were all over the place. They were all grabbing and like you said, there was a lot of egos. And we had somewhere in, I think it was Iowa, that had sent boxes and boxes of knitted bonnets for newborn babies. And I'm sure they meant well. The shipping, the amount of time that those women took to make these bonnets. Did nobody tell them that on average it was 105 degrees in Haiti? We were going to put woolen bonnets on these babies, but you couldn't offend anyone and say, we really don't need these. Could you take them back to your country and give them to your underserved community? And everybody wanted, like you said, wanted to make sure that one NGO wasn't getting the money, this nonprofit. I left there with the image of NGOs that I was never going to work with them. I was so unimpressed. These so-called charities and do-gooders and stuff, and like you said, their priority was visibility, to be seen to be doing things, and to be getting the funding. The money was the biggest thing. So tell us about your first 3.0 forum. Were you at the first one?
So we actually have been having 3.0 Forum since 2008. So this year it's going to take place for anyone that is listening to us to this and want to join. It's going to be on the 5th of September in Paris. and it's going to be the 15th year anniversary. So they have been going on for a while. The forums are a way of doing this type of work, right? Of trying to bring together, we call it in French, we say convergence, to converge different actors around a joint agenda and a joint goal. Putting aside exactly what you said, putting aside my reputation, my name, my organization's name, my ego, and trying to say, okay, let's all meet and discuss, no matter where we come from, if it's private sector, if it's public sector, if it's philanthropy, if I'm a startupper, let's actually come together and find concrete solutions and ways of fixing the problems that we see in South Sudan, in Central African Republic, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, wherever they might be, right? In Venezuela, in Haiti, wherever they might be. It happens every year. It's a hard work to do, because when you do a forum, which, I don't know, maybe you have a lot of money behind, and you just attract big names and they come and speak and they have a platform and everybody shines, everything is good. That's a relatively easy thing to do. Of course, it's not easy to find the money and all of that, but if you have that set up, it's easy to do. If you try to do a forum which tries and have a different approach, which is really co-constructed by the different partners that take place, and it's not like an agenda dictated by us, it's a huge amount of work. We have a team dedicated to that. There are 10 people that work throughout the year with over 300 partners to have working groups on different thematics, and then have a co-decision process with these partners in terms of what sessions do we want to have, what do we feel we should be discussing this year, do we all agree that this is the right topic, what type of speakers do we want. So it's really per se just the process of organizing it, a process of creating this convergence of actors in a different way, but it makes it way harder. The real work is often the hardest work, right?
Yeah, the logistics.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens for the team, is that it's a long work. It takes time to get everybody on board, all the different partners on board. It's not just us sending the agenda saying this is how it is. It's like really discussing with all the partners, saying what do you want to see in this? What is your priority, to make sure everybody has ownership over it. Yeah, but I think part of the journey is to try and do things differently, and that's what we try and do. And we have the 15th forum this year. We also, now that I've arrived, we've also started having discussions on how we want to rethink how the forum should be going forward. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is that not only there is this World Forum in Paris, which to be honest is very European, and we call it the World Forum.
Très grand.
Exactly. It's not necessarily a proper World Forum. But I think what's exciting is that we started, and the teams have started doing forums in countries that have this type of issues, right? So we had a 3.0 forum in Tunisia, in the Philippines. I was last week in the 3.0 forum in the Middle East, discussing also about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Lebanon, Jordan, and the whole region. They're trying to bring these forums where the discussion needs to happen, because often world, global, blah, blah discussions are difficult to then concretize. Well, if you have this discussion, in Tunisia with the prime minister and key ministers and the private sector and the non-profits and the UN working in Tunisia, it's much easier to come out of it with some concrete outcomes and concrete action points. And that's one of the big directions. So for those living around the world, definitely keep an eye out, because we're going to increase these forums at a national level to really try and bring the discussion around 3.0 closer to the reality on the ground. And I think that's...
And are the local forums well attended?
They are. I know that, for example, we had one maybe a few years ago in Palestine, and we had over 1,000 people, plus many connected online. So they are well attended, both in terms of the speakers, let's say, that we get, and the level. In Tunis also we had the head of government joining. So there is an attention, because there is a need to have this type of discussions. I think we have a lot of them in the US and in Europe, but there is a need to actually have them in the countries where there are more urgent problems and more urgent solutions found. And so they are well attended, and I think they really respond to a need. And then we also need to learn how is it that we can have the greatest impact. And that's an internal learning process that I would say is ongoing.
Right. Now, you said that people can attend the forum in September in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Can anyone attend? How does that work? Or you're talking about online attending?
In terms of public, there is a focus on professionals. So usually it's people that, work for any of this type of any sector that are interested in this type of topics and that want to join. So they can join on behalf of the organization, but you can also join as an individual. So you can take a ticket and just be part of it and be part of the discussion. And there's also going to be an evening event more focused on youth mobilization that is going to happen the same day on the 5th of September. Some of the events are live streamed, so you can also follow online. I think though, at least for me, these type of forums, what's interesting is to be there in person, because it's really what happens off the stage. It's the networking, it's meeting people that are trying to fix things, are feeling a bit less alone in doing that. And I think that online, of course, you can have interesting talks and interesting speakers, but that is fine everywhere, right? It's not the same.
Okay, well, maybe I'll come. How long does it last?
It's just one day.
Just the one day?
Yeah, just the one day and the one evening.
So obviously the solutions for change need to happen on a macro and a micro level. So what concrete actions can individuals take for themselves right now?
There's so many small fixes we can do in our lives, and that I should do more in my life as well, because it's difficult to change. For example, I was in Sicily this weekend for a wedding, and I flew to Sicily because unfortunately there's no good train connection in Italy from Rome to the south, because it's very underdeveloped, and it would have taken 2 days to get there. But it's very hard. We had to renounce to certain things or to not eat.
You felt guilty.
Yeah, I didn't used to. I think what's interesting is that now I think about it, I feel sorry that I don't have better alternatives. I think the individual action is to understand what alternatives you have, right? And when you have good enough alternatives and you already choose a different way of traveling, a different way of eating, a different way of consuming, that can already make a difference. But of course, what's very difficult is when the alternative is not there and you need to choose, okay, do I go to my friend's wedding or not because I need to fly and that's the only way? Then it's very hard, right, to say no. And I think that's why change is difficult, because we all want a better world, but when it requires us sacrificing things, and by us, I start with myself, then you're like, okay, well, no, I really want to eat this prosciutto and I really want to eat this salami and I can't resist. And then you don't, take that type of individual action all the way. But I think we need to be aware of it. We need to be honest that it's not easy, also at the individual level. But try. Just small things every day, be it how we eat, be it how we travel, be it what we buy and how many clothes we buy. I buy too many clothes, and I started and I started to think, okay, maybe I invest a little more, I get more quality clothes, but I buy a little less, and thinking, okay, on my daily life, what are the few things that I can do that will already make a difference? And that's, I think, at the very individual level. But then there is a second layer, which for me is an immediate layer, which is what can you do for your community and what can you do with your community? Maybe you have someone in your family that, is skeptical about climate change, or that, is uninterested in looking at helping others. But maybe already you can convince that person, you can talk to them and show them things, and already slowly convincing more people to take these small individual actions is going to create a way bigger difference than if you do it only yourself. And also looking at your community in terms of not only convincing them about what's happening, trying to make them more aware, trying to mobilize them, but also using your community and activating your community to find solutions to the problems that surely you can see within your, be it in agriculture, be it the nature that you have around you, be it poor people within your community that are left behind. Wherever we live, there is someone that is suffering from poverty or from being excluded or from consequences of climate change. And we have such a big power that I think we often underestimate as individuals to actually make that difference and activate others to make a difference for those people. And of course, then there's the macro level, there's the policies, there's the big forums where decisions are taken. But those, to me, that's not where the real long-term change comes from. Like, it can't come only from there. It needs to come, as I was saying before, from us, from the bottom. And that's where we really play a role.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't think you should feel guilty about flying, because it's only practical at this point. I fly a lot. I mean, you have to get from A to B, and you're doing such great work. Think of the alternative. Suppose you didn't do what you're doing because you couldn't get there. However, talking about the macro level, what we need to work on is to get the airlines to make sure that those planes that we're traveling in are not causing so much pollution. You see what I mean? But on a personal level, I have to say this month, finally, it's sort of dawned on me, I stopped using plastic bottles. It was a personal thing. I always boil my water, and I always use the water from the plastic bottle without thinking. And I saw all this white stuff in the bottom of the kettle, and I said, what in the world? And I said, I'm just drinking plastic and polluting the earth, increasing the, it's such a simple thing. If you think your water is not good enough or clean enough, just boil it and then keep it and take it from that urn or whatever else you're using. So, and then I started thinking, I said, if everybody stopped using plastic bottles, it would have a huge impact. And we see all day long them talking about how the plastic in the oceans is messing up the dolphins and the fish. And so I think individuals need to start taking responsibility for the things that they can change. Because it's easy to say, I'm just me, and that doesn't make any difference. Oh, politics, they just do whatever they want. Now we've got a ban on abortions. I'm sure you know what's going on in the US. It's craziness. But you get to a sense where you just feel like, well, what difference can I make? Obviously banning abortion does not affect me individually. So you could easily say, I don't care, they're crazy, but c'est la vie. Yeah. Anyway, I know I've taken up a lot of your time. If someone wants more information about the 30 Foundation, where can they find it?
They can link up with us through our website. So it's 30.org. And we're setting up right now social media. So if you check us out on social media, they're super empty because we are starting now to set it up. So please follow, because this is exactly the moment where we need people to start engaging with us when we're starting to build our presence. But if you don't see anything posted, that's why we're building the comms team. As I was saying, it's a lot of internal work. But you can definitely connect with us, and even if your organization is interested in becoming part of this effort, you will find a form on the website where you can register and really become part of this common vision of having a 3-0 world.
Fabulous. Well, it has been great speaking with you, Gaia. I really, really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope after you publish your book, you'll come back and tell us some more about it and more about what those wonderful ladies gave you as a tip for life's unanswerable questions.
I would be super happy to come back, and thanks for having me, for the time, for the nice dialogue. It was really great, and it's good to take these moments, I think, for me, for you, but also for people listening, learn from each other, and when you speak, you always reflect back also in your life and where you stand and what you want to do more. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to do it.
My pleasure. And give my congratulations and condolences to your fiance, because he's going to have his hands full. You are doing so much, and you have so much to do and to contribute to the world. I hope he's a very understanding and helpful, supportive guy. I'm sure he is.
I'm lucky he is. I chose him well. I'm not lucky. Let's take credit. I chose well. He's amazing and very supportive and understanding. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Nadu.
nice talking with you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Gaia Van Der Esch is an amazing young woman doing amazing things. Hold on to your seats as we zoom towards a 3-0 world. So today we talk to a woman who is changing the world and attempting to mobilize millions of people towards a world without exclusion, without carbon, and without poverty. But as she says, we must be the change we want to see. By 2027, the core temperature of the world will have increased by 1.5 degrees, and global warming will continue. This is something to really think about and see what concrete actions we all can take. Thanks for listening to Wellness and Wisdom with me, Dr. Nadu Tuwakli. If you want to find out more information, head over to drtuwakli.com or subscribe to my blog. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please click the follow button on your favorite podcast platform and share this episode with a friend. Wishing you the best of health and happiness. We're in this together. Until next time, stay well.